Th Thank you very much, Dr. Gutman. I must say this is a new experience for me. I've got more than 5 minutes, and they don't have me sitting someplace where you can't find me. I do have a potted plant at home that my niece has got a picture of me that says, "There's the potted plant." Let me give you just a wee bit of background on myself, because I'm viewed a little bit as the crazy uncle who's come down from the attic after 26 years. Yeah, crazy uncle, but really cantankerous uncle. Well, I only appear cantankerous because I'm very angry over the war, just very angry. When human beings dying and other human beings can do something about it, that's something to get angry about. But this is a format that's not necessary. And let me just say quickly, Joe Biden and I served together. Dennis Kucinich is a person I've always admired. I admired Joe. In fact, I thought at the last debate he did quite well. I agree with probably half of his stuff, and I disagree with half. But he's chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and that's a significant role that he can play. My areas of concern before I go into Iraq is very simple. It's the war. 2, it's the arms race, and you're all foreign policy aficionados. It's the arms race that has been initiated by our government with respect to Russia and China, and that's very, very serious in my mind. And then as a result of that, the arms race that ties into what Dwight Eisenhower warned us of, the military-industrial complex, because for them to make a profit, they need arms races. That's what it's all about. They need wars, because when you expand your equipment, you now got to buy some more equipment, and people are making profit off of that. And it's just very, very unfortunate. But let's just focus on Iraq. By and large, it's difficult to weigh in and have people understand that the war in Iraq didn't have to take place. Nor did the war in Vietnam. That didn't have to take place. And the French had left, we had financed them, and we just continued on for whatever reasons, which were not valid. One of my staff members was in Hanoi a year or so ago, and there's a Baskin-Robbins in Hanoi. Now, what does that tell you? There's a Baskin-Robbins there. We killed over 3 million Southeast Asians. We laid the land waste, and we left. And of course, keep in mind, there's a parallel here that's very interesting. We left, and everybody said the dominoes are going to fall, and all of Southeast Asia will go communist. That just didn't happen. And so that same analysis I'll bring forth in looking at the Iraq situation. But I just don't know, with an audience, how important it is to stipulate that this is a war of our choice, totally. And when I say our, I'm just talking about the President of the United States and the majority of the Congress at the time. Stop and think. If you take the poll numbers at the time, there's an indication 50 million Americans did not buy into this war. 50 million Americans thought differently about this problem than did the majority of the Congress of the United States. That is a pretty awesome figure to ponder on, because one of the reasons I'm running for office is to try to inform Americans who want to be empowered that they're the only answer, and they need to become lawmakers. You know, we're schooled with the thought that, well, you go and vote. Well, the only thing that happens on election day is you give your power away to somebody else, a politician, who then you go protest, you beg, you write a letter to try and do the right thing. Well, the central power of government is not voting. The central power of government is lawmaking. And that's what the people have to do. If the people today could make laws in this country, we would have been out of Iraq early last fall. But that's not the case. What we're stuck with is our representation. Was Saddam Hussein a threat to us? I have a background in intelligence. I was in the service for 3 years, and I was in the counterintelligence corps, and I was an adjutant for the communications and intelligence service that used the CIC as our cover. Served in Germany, and both served in France. And I was a top secret control officer when I was 23 years old. So I have some knowledge of how the secrecy elements work, and I've written about it extensively. And it's It's very, very important. Probably the thing that will destroy our democracy is the fact that 80% of what the government does is held secret, need not be secret, and the people should know about it. That's the strength of the democracy. When the people don't know about it, then they go along like sheep, listening to what the rhetoric of whatever major power is putting it forth, and the people just don't get the reasoning potential and back off because they just don't think they can influence the decisions involved. I was interviewed about 5 times on MSNBC in the summer of '02. The reason why they came to me, now keep in mind, I'm out of office for 27 years, why they would dig down to the barrel and get somebody who's not who's not in the government now, but I'm the only guy they could find that would speak up and say that George Bush is lying. He's doing the same thing that Lyndon Johnson did. And of course, the evidence that's coming out today with the Shrum book, with the Vanetta and Gertz book, and of course, the senator from Illinois, Durbin, they were all admitting that they knew at the time. They knew at the time that there was one set of briefings about the skepticism of the problem with Saddam Hussein, and the other from the White House that it's a given. He's got atomic bombs and he's got weapons of mass destruction. It's very tragic because that was not the case at all, as we now know. But it was enough to hoodwink, unfortunately, some very bright senators. Because, and I've said this, and it's the embarrassment of Democrats. Oh, sure, this is George Bush's war. Nobody else's. It's a war for oil that he and his neocons. And I don't know if you're familiar about the neocon plan for U.S. hegemony, controlling oil and then using our military might to sustain that power. But if somebody wants to ask that question later, we can go into it, because it's on paper, and it was early on before George Bush even, the thought that he might even become president. But let me read you one quote that I think is very significant because it's in the lead-up. And many of you'll find in reading Vanetta book and Gert's book, you'll see that there was and there's a great summary of it in the last magazine section of the New York Times. And it was just excellent. And of course, there's the amendment that was put up. And we're told, particularly by the senator from New York, that, well, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have voted for it. Well, obviously, they all knew then what was going on. And I make this argument, not in a partisan way. If they didn't know what was going on and they're senators of the United States, then they're too incompetent to become president. But if they knew what was going on, then what was the decision they made? It was a political decision. Now, there are decisions that you can make in politics. That's no big deal. But when it comes to war, you're talking about extensive human life. And for a president to go to war, for whatever reasons, is a moral decision of the highest order. And of course, our president did not even come close to meeting that criteria. Let me quote, because there was two amendments. One was the amendment by the senator from Michigan, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee now, and his amendment stated that let's break this up into 2 decisions. Let's have a decision here where if the president goes to the UN, and then at the UN, if he can't get the UN to go along, then he's got to come back to us. Well, of course, Bush, that didn't pass. And it's interesting, you may want to take a list of names of people who did not vote for that approach, who speak about their position being that approach, but did not vote for when they had a chance. But let me quote to you, because this is what happened at the United Nations. And keep in mind, the Congress is the one that declares war. And it's unfortunate we've never had a declaration of war since the Second World War. I recall during the Vietnam period when I was debating the war, I offered a resolution in the Senate to declare war on North Vietnam. And I didn't get 5, 6 sponsors. But it was to demonstrate something that we really should know what we're doing when we do it and know the consequences of it, because the Constitution is the only thing that keeps us together as a nation. And so here's the quote that I want to read you. And if you're not familiar with the UN Charter, you well know that the UN Charter has very specific things. You have to be threatened on your soil before you can go to war. And, of course, we met none of those. So we are totally in violation of the UN Charter, which, of course, is a treaty that we're bound by. And there are a lot of treaties we're bound by that don't mean a hill of beans as far as political leaders are concerned. But I'd like to quote Dr. Mohammed Bel El-Baradei, and I watched it at the time because he taunted the CIA in one instance. Tell us where those weapons are. We'll go find them, and they did. And they went and they came up with nothing. They did it a couple times, and of course he wanted to keep going. But here's the quote that I want to share with you, and that is, let's see. Let me find it. Okay. On March 7th, 2003, Dr. Mohammed El-Baradei, and here's the quote, "After 3 months of intrusive inspections, we have to date found no evidence or plausible indication of the revival of a nuclear weapons program." End of quote. I want to quote the head of the CIA, Tenet, and his quote is very instructive because it follows on to that, and that is, in October 2002, public, this is not just what the briefings the members of Congress were getting, and he essentially was explaining that the invasion would cause a great deal of problems for us, and as opposed with what we would destabilize, and that also it was not in our interest. Now, this is a public statement that the head of the CIA is telling the Congress and the American people that it's not in our interest. Let me give you a comparison, which is pretty shocking about what's involved in Iraq. This institution, in a study, came up with the fact that about 818,000 Iraqis have been killed as a result of the war that we initiated. Now, before it's all said and done, it'll be 1 million. But translate that to what that means in the United States, because we're 12 times their size. What does that translate to? That translates to 1.8 million people being killed in the United States. Now, that's 10 states that they're all dead, plus 2 of our major cities. Stop and think of that now. If you're an Iraqi, these are the proportions that you need to face. Little wonder that they do not want the United States there. They view us as an army of occupation. And we are. We truly are. And here's the test, and it really gives you the answer as to what's happening with the insurgency. Insurgency works if you've got the population behind you. It doesn't work if you don't have the population behind you. This is a historical fact. You can look at various periods of time. If the people support it, because what happens is the insurgents then bleed back into society and you can't find them. This is the problem we had in Vietnam. We could not identify them because the people fundamentally were not with, and this is even in the South, were not with the South Vietnamese government, and that was proven by subsequent events. And so what we have is a situation that's impossible to win. Now, George Bush is trying to give us now what he calls the Korean model. Boy, that's so far from the mark, it's laughable. In Korea, we went there to defend, not to occupy, and they needed us to be there to defend. And you can take polls today. You know, some angry people think some of our troops have been there too long, but by and large, the people supported our presence, and that's not the situation in Iraq, so it's not even close to that model. Let me touch on another area, because I'll try to, and it's unfair because Senator Biden will come in and Congressman Kucinich, and they won't have heard my comments, and so I'll be relying upon all of you to ask the questions that will bring about a certain germaneness. But let me tell you where I really have some serious fear. And because I don't think that Bush's articulation of a model that Korea is going to work. But stop and think, what's going to happen? I don't care how many generals come back and tell us that things are going well. And, of course, they excoriate the media. But it's clear that things are not going well there at all. Very, very clear. And it is a civil war. And the civil war has been going on for some time. And we're right in the middle of it. And we think we can control it. There's just no way you can control it. We think we can train. This joke of training troops, and I say a joke because that's where most of the graft takes place. And we give the money at the top into their government, which essentially is a puppet government, and then it goes down, and of course it gets the sticky fingers of graft all the way down before it gets into the training. These people were living there long before we came onto the horizon in the Western Hemisphere. So for us, in our arrogance, to think that we got to train them before they can deal with their own society, I think is a bit of a stretch. But it's what the administration will do come September, when regardless of what happens, the American people will not be persuaded that it has worked, the surge has worked. And I think any thoughtful person could have looked at the facts before that and knew this. And it's real sad that when you get a general who goes over there with a PhD, he wanted to get the 4-star, and really is waging a process that he didn't think could work in his intellectual capacity before he went over there or had the opportunity to go over there. That many of you may not recall General Westmoreland, who was the hero at the time, who became reviled in our society. Well, I think General Petraeus has got a problem coming up that he may have taken too much. But the problem that I see is, and it goes back to when people are cornered. When you take a Cheney who can't admit, he could look at that wall and say, that is white. It can be what it is, but he'll tell you it's white. And he'll repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until you think it's white, or you may never think it's white. It's just unbelievable that they can just throw out these facts in a gullible nation because that person occupies this lofty position. He must know what's going on. One of the advantages of having been a senator and been to the White House frequently is to know that they don't know what's going on. In fact, I'll digress for a slight vignette. I was a freshman senator, and Scoop Jackson thought that he could control me, and he says, and I hadn't made up my mind on the ABM. Well, I never made that mistake again, because when you're the swing vote, boy, the whole world's descending on you. So he says, Mike, let's go up and see the president. So I'd never been in the Oval Office. Just came out of Alaska. So he takes me up. He just takes me up, and we go to the Oval Office. And there's only 3 people in the Oval Office. There's Richard Nixon sitting in front of me, the President of the United States, and Scoop Jackson. And they start funning me. Nixon says, I wanted Scoop to be my Secretary of Defense. They go on. And lo and behold, and he's giving me the rationale to vote for the ABM. And all I could do is, I'm listening to him, I said, my God, he's not telling me anything more than I just read in Time magazine. Don't assume that they know what's going on, because there's just too many things that face them up to it. The threat we have in Iran, if things get too desperate, just look at the way they're teasing up the situation. And the American press is buying into it. When's the last, you hear repeatedly, and with the pundits and what have you, that they've arrested 5 of our citizens. Undoubtedly, just looking at their backgrounds, innocent people, why would they get arrested? Well, what about the fact that our Army arrested what they call 5 of their diplomats in Abril a month and a half before? And now that's up in Kurdistan. And these people are supposed to be dealing with weapons. Let's look at weapons for a moment. Here, China has sold silk missiles to Iran a long time ago. And what do we do about China? They can't do anything about it. They're entitled to have weapons. They're entitled to have supporters. We do it all the time. Guess who brought the Taliban into existence if it wasn't us? So this argument really doesn't play out all that well when you analyze it very closely. My fear is that when you have a tit for tat like that, and then you go into negotiations and you read closely what the negotiators are doing, they're guaranteeing that those negotiations are going nowhere. And when you see all the conditions that have to be met before we would get into serious negotiations, well, supposing there's some altercation that takes place that would cause and grabbing their arresting by military, our military, arresting 5 of their supposed diplomats, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. That's a provocation. That's an interesting provocation of arresting somebody else. And what they wanted to do is provocate them to do something stupid. Well, they were clever. They didn't go outside of Iran. They just picked up 5 Americans that were in Iran. And so that was an easy thing to do. So the provocation misfired. What other provocations are coming? You know, stop and think. We've got 2 nuclear carrier fleets, the Stennis and the Nimitz, in the Persian Gulf. And I mean, first off, I think it's very dangerous to do that militarily because you could lock them in. And a Silk missile could take out any one of those. I don't know what their defenses are, but I know that we're there to do some maneuvers with, was it Bahrain or Abu Dhabi? You know, can you imagine 2 nuclear fleets doing maneuvers with these 2 countries? I mean, it's a joke. It's a provocation. And you don't know where these provocations can end. It's a little bit like when Richard Nixon unleashed the nuclear bombers that went right to the border of the Soviet Union at the time, right to the border. They were nuclear armed, and they were on their way to go bomb. It was called the Crazy Richard scenario that he and Henry Kissinger cooked up. Well, that means that you believe Tom Clancy, that all you got to do is pick up a telephone and stop anything you want or make it go forward, or submarines can do a 90-degree turn in the water. You know, this is the danger of these things relying upon the weapons. You know, it's serious. And so I just hope that Iran ends there, and I think my time is running out.
I just wanted to...
I was just killing time to let Joe and
okay.
to get here. But maybe we could get into questions with me, and I'll be able to sit down and listen to them.
Okay, if you could just briefly explain your policy for ending the war in Iraq successfully.
Good question.
If you could do that, that'd be all right.
We have passed out papers. I don't know if we had enough for the entire group. The Congress is generally the most powerful in the not generally, is the most powerful institution in a constitution. The second most powerful is the executive. It's an interesting development of history that we've now come to an imperial presidency and the Congress is substantially weakened. That was not the case when we had Lyndon Johnson, who was the leader, and Sam Rayburn in the House, but it is the case right now. And so the problem is the Congress feels, the leadership feels they have a mandate from the American people to go ahead and end the war. Well, they do have that mandate. And but are they exercising that mandate? Well, they made some very serious mistakes in my mind. They started out with the idea that they think, and I think this is to accommodate the views of the American people, they think that they can negotiate with George Bush on this subject. I don't think it's possible. George Bush has a different agenda than they would possibly have. So we started in January, and the only 2 things that we've done thus far is we've had a non-binding resolution that you could drive a Mack truck through it because it was non-binding, but if it were binding, it still left the president to be able to declare any kind of an emergency that would upset the process of it. Okay. Secondly, now, the only way to use the power of the Congress is to pass a law. I've put forth a withdrawal act. It's different than the withdrawal acts that they are playing with, and it defunds at the same time, and it repeals the earlier resolution. But what's different about it is that there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's very clear you get out. Now, that's something the American people can understand and react upon. The problem is the reaction time that's needed for them to do something. And so what this sets up is a confrontation between the Congress and the executive. And, of course, this law has some very unusual penalties. 5 years in jail because it's a felony without the likelihood of parole, and you also have $1 million fine. And it would apply to the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of the Treasury. Now, how do we get this law passed? It would be to get any law passed that George Bush is opposed to. First thing, you introduce it. You start it in the Senate or in the House, get the votes to pass it in the House, and it goes to the Senate. Now, the Senate's going to filibuster it. Well, there's nothing wrong with filibuster. I've done a lot of them. And so they filibuster. It means you got to get tough. So that means that the leader has got to say, okay, these people want to filibuster. Let's have a vote on cloture on Monday at noon, on Tuesday at noon, and Wednesday at noon. And do that every single day, 7 days a week, no vacations. Of course, we're criticizing the Parliament in the green zone for talking about a vacation, but of course our people took their vacations while people are dying. So now you have a situation where everybody is discomforted in the Congress, and they're voting every single day on cloture. They'll carry it in about 20 days. It goes to the President, he vetoes it. Comes back. Now we start the same process again. At noon, every single day, the Pelosi puts up the deal for a vote. That's a half hour. That's all that takes. Same thing in the Senate. And they keep doing this every single day. That gives the American people time to focus on who's voting which way and then deal with them at home. And the peace community can now use their troops to deal with them at home. Well, you'll see two alternatives. One is that they will wither by the end of August. First off, they're used to taking all August off, and it'll be pleasant to have them all here all August, working every day. And it's only a half hour for each of these votes. Now, they can do a lot of work for the people on the rest of the day, but I'll guarantee you that towards the last week of August, they'll be turning before your very eyes, and you'll have overridden the president's veto. That means that now the law is to get out. You got 120 days. Not abating the law is a felony, and that would put in motion an entire impeachment process on the prima facie case.
So how realistic is this?
How realistic? I guarantee it works. I guarantee it works. Stop and think. You vote every single day. Just listen, read the papers. Read the papers about this Republican is twisting there, this one is jumping around. Here, I'll give you a vote. It was interesting. On the first vote you had in the House, the Republicans thought they would lose 56 Republicans. What happened? They lost only 17. Well, something happened on the way to the vote. What happened on the way to the vote is that Congressman Murtha was talking about playing chief executive. That gained them a constitutional cover of saying that the Constitution is very clear. The president is the one that is that is the commander-in-chief, not any member of Congress. And the Congress cannot run a war. They can stop a war. They can start a war. And so, answer your question, how realistic is this going to happen? I'll tell you, I know politicians, and when it comes to political survival, they will change their vote. And they will make the speeches necessary to change their vote so they look good. And so you'll just watch them, and what harm is there in doing it? But what you're going to do is you're going to cause a lot of discomfort, and that's what needs to happen.
So your plan, summarize it. You said bring the troops home by Christmas. That's your plan?
What happens if you were to start this, let's say within the next couple of weeks, it's done by Labor Day, and you got 120 days to get out by law, that means everybody's home by Christmas. That's what that means, by law.
And if the president doesn't obey this, he can be fined money.
Well, now you see, he's disobeyed a lot of things, his signing statements, and there's a lot if people really wanted to go at him. But if the president doesn't obey a law like this, where the American people have weighed in, mind you, the ingredient to this is that the American people now have enough time to watch the Congress on one single act. What happens in Congress, the normal vote to override, have vote to override, didn't get it, end of story, go on, do another part of the business. This is a vote to override every single day at noon. The media would just go at this because you can see the drama. Remember the drumbeat with respect to our hostages of every day, counting the days of our hostages in Iran? And that's the drumbeat you'll get with this, is how many senators are now voting on override. Next day, how many? And that's where the people weigh in.
Okay, I think we have...
Senator, I would like to ask you a slightly different question, which is, you said last Sunday that this is as much a Democratic Party war as George Bush's war, partly because many of your co-presidential, your co-panelists had voted in favor of it. Could you just elaborate a little on why it is, in your view, the Democratic Party was so easy to co-opt in this war? And just as a follow-up to that,
I think,
which, since...
Hold your follow-up so I can answer that and then come back at your follow-up. Because that is a very interesting question. Why would they cave in? They made it possible. Keep in mind, it was under the control, the Senate was Democrat. And so they had to put the resolution up. If they didn't want to, they didn't have to. So Lieberman and Edwards wrote the resolution, and the leader put it up for a vote. If the leader decided it wasn't going to be put up, that was the end of the story. And so now, why would they do that? Politicians, and this is the basis of the strategy I've just described, politicians want to please people. If they think that public opinion is going in that direction, that is the way they go. In other words, the old joke is, show me which way the crowd's going so I can run to the head of the crowd, because if I'm not at the head of the crowd, I'm not their leader. And so That's the process that goes through in politicians' minds. It doesn't make them bad, it just makes them human beings. Next part of your question.
Well, since so many Democrats are, in your view, tainted by association with this war, hypothetically, if you were to be president January the 20th, 2009, you'd have quite a narrow pool to choose from. Who would be your Secretary of State? Who would be your National Security Advisor? Who would be your UN ambassador? There are not that many Democrats.
Oh, yeah, but let me tell you, first off, got to keep in mind, I'm a maverick Democrat. You don't see the Democrats jumping up and down to get me all the debates and get me the money and all that. No. So, in fact, I'm a free man. I probably will be lucky if I raise $10 million and it's coming in $50, $100, $5. So, you can't, I prove, there's two reasons why I'm not getting money. One, I'm not in office. So these people that are investing, these lobbyists who are bundling, they don't lose. If Hillary doesn't get elected, she's still the senator from New York. And that applies to all the others. In my case, it's a no-win. First off, he's the crazy uncle from the attic. And secondly, I've got nothing to give them if I don't win. So will I win? Interesting. I'll pose that question for you. And the answer is real simple. It's very fundamental. Are the American people, and I had a person call me up on the phone and says, Senator, you're off the mark. Don't jump on George Bush. He's helping you. He's helping you because he's made things so bad in this country that maybe the American people are so fed up that they'll jump the traces of politics as usual. And that's what's at stake here. It's politics as usual. Do we do the same old thing? Here, let's look at the media. You're with the media. Isn't it interesting? The media excoriates the political process because money corrupts the process. And yet, they measure your likelihood of getting elected by how much you can get corrupted by the money. Is that not that's an interesting conundrum. I haven't quite figured out how to do it, but I just want to lay that before you as something to study. Thank you. Another question.
We've actually gone more than a half hour.
Well, I know, and I apologize. When they get here, I'll shut up.
Let's see if we have. Is the congressman here? Okay. So one.
Is the congressman here?
And we'll move to Kucinich. Do you, would anybody like to ask a question, Martin, or anybody ask a?
Yes, I've got a question. Tell me, what about the other aspects of presidential policy apart from Iraq? I mean, what about the economy? Would you repeal the Bush tax cuts? Would you try and get the Doha World Trade Organization deal signed? Would you put protectionist tariffs on imports from China?
Let me start. You've laid a bunch of things on. The first thing, what I view as the most serious problem we face in the United States is our system of taxation. You're worried about repealing taxes, and of course you listen to all the health care plans. We're going to subsidize this. You're going to get this deduction. I mean, it's making the tax code, which is this high. It's going to probably be this high before we're done. Wipe it all out. We don't need an income. The income tax is a corrupt form of taxation. Government. The first thing government does is raise revenue. When it raises revenue, dishonestly, the people lose. They know they're going to not get fairness with the balance of it. So what do they want to do? They don't have any respect for government. They don't have any respect for the system of taxation. I am for what I call a fair green tax, which is a retail sales tax. Now, people say, oh, that's not progressive. Of course it's progressive. It's as progressive as the income tax, because with the income tax, in theory, that's not the way it works, but in theory, the more you earn, the more you make. The more you earn, the more you pay. And the same thing with sales tax. The more you spend, the more you pay. Now, the biggest problem, and you put your finger on it, we have a $50 trillion fiscal gap in this country. And whenever people are talking about they're going to raise a lot of money and do all these things, I mean, this is really not being realistic. This fiscal gap is there. The Comptroller General offered to brief all of the presidential candidates. Only 3 have shown up. I was one of them. And how do you deal with that? I don't know how to deal with that. I know that we are rushing for an economic catastrophe in the United States, and when it hits us, we'll take the world over the side. Stop and think. A nation that goes from 60% manufacturing is down to 10%, and all the money is being churned on Wall Street. And when you get people in the hedge funds, which are pouring money into all the money, I'm just answering the first part of his question, unfortunately.
So you've gone over half hour.
Okay, anybody want to speak then?
I think the congressman here? Congressman's here?
No, he's not here.
What?
Carry on.
Okay, okay. I think we'll have him speak and then you guys.
Oh, is he here?
I think so.
Oh, good. Great. Okay, thank you.